Hi, this is Kris Castro, and this is the Lead Upside Down podcast, where leaders are sharing how they are leading in non-traditional ways based on Jesus's leadership style. If you have any questions, go back to the trailer episode and that should answer them. But right now, grab your favorite beverage and settle in. If you have any questions or comments, especially if something resonates with you, feel free to go to my website, begin2shift.com, and set up a coffee and conversation meeting, and we can chat about it in more detail. All right, enjoy. Hey, everybody, it is Kris Castro with the Lead Upside Down podcast, and today my guest is John Ramstead. And John is the CEO of Beyond Influence, which is a firm committed to helping clients double their value within a year, guided by his faith as a follower of Jesus. With a rich background as a Navy combat fighter pilot, entrepreneur, and executive, John has over 30 years of leadership experience. He's been married to his best friend for 34 years and is a proud father to 3 sons. John is a widely recognized person for his work as a leadership expert and executive coach, including his role on his own podcast called Eternal Leadership. And he's the author of a best-selling book, On Purpose with Purpose. And his company is honored as the preferred leadership training organization by the U.S. Air Force. He is driven by his mission to equip and inspire leaders to serve in God's kingdom, and his journey of overcoming a life-threatening accident, enduring 2 years of hospitalization and 23 surgeries, has touched millions with a message of resilience and faith. Wow, John, excited to have you on my podcast.
Kris, so great to be here. Good to see your smiling face again.
Yes, and I had the honor of being on John's podcast too, which is going to release it sometime in the next month or so. So I'm excited about that too. Well, John, as you well know, we always start out the podcast with 2 questions, and then we take a break, and then we go in for the longer, deeper conversation. And the first question I want to ask you is, how has leading upside down affected your life and work? And what does it mean to you as well?
Well, I think it's made a dramatic difference because, Kris, you and I were actually talking about servant leadership before we even hit record. And, servant leadership, I think, is often it's put in place and it's kind of soft and you lose accountability. And here's what happens is you kind of have this command control mode, and a lot of leaders are really good at getting stuff done. And then I kind of turn over control, and then all of a sudden results kind of don't get as good. So I kind of snap back to command and control because I don't know really how to do it. I actually call this, when you're going back and forth between these 2 modes, Kris, the schizophrenic leadership model. And so I had to really think about, hey, how do I really lead like Jesus did? And you know what I started thinking about, because you know what, I've actually researched this. There's 850 definitions of what leadership is. But here's a question we could ask ourselves: what is the purpose of leadership? And I think here's the purpose. Here's how I think about it. I think the first one is, and Jesus did this constantly, and it's to cast vision. And not only cast vision about what we're doing and why it's important, but what is the vision for your own life as a human being, as a person outside of work? And I am constantly working to connect those 2 together. I think the next purpose of leadership is to serve, but let's define what that means. To serve somebody that works for you, works alongside you, even if you're volunteering at a church, is to help them succeed. Right. And then the next thing I need to do, I think part of this, and Jesus always did this, is build people's capacity so that they get gooder, whether it's in their own leadership skills, personal skills, professional skills. And I do that by helping give people the knowledge that they need, give them the experiences that they need, the tools they need to do their job. Because delegation often gets a bad word, but I can't delegate unless I've built your capacity to have some measure of success in maybe the task I'm giving you. And if you totally mess it up, I see that as a fantastic outcome, because in that, we're going to dive in and say, okay, in this, even though we didn't have the right outcome, what did you do well? What did we learn? So next time we can do it better. And then finally, I get to a point where I can completely empower you, and I've built your capacity. And man, that just feels good to people when they're trusted. So I think leading upside down has allowed me to continue to work in my strengths, do the things that I should do. So many executives that I talk to, they're so busy they don't get to do that because they don't, I think, really understand the model. And that's a lot of the work that I get to do with people. So it's allowed me to build some amazing companies, some incredible teams. Relationships and trust are so deep that we can have conflict, and the conflict becomes productive and creative and drives innovation versus a wedge in relationships. And that's where I always want to get every team I work with.
That's good stuff. So the last question, of course, is for people who are in the process of learning how to lead upside down or have never done it and wanted to start. What advice would you give them?
Well, two things come to mind. I think the first thing is it's all about identity. It really is. And let's define what identity is. And this is what we believe to be true about ourselves. And here's what I know is there's been a whole bunch of stuff that's happened in our life, experiences we've had, things that have been said to us, maybe what we think other people's opinions of are us. We always build this narrative and it reinforces how we think about ourselves. And what I realized was, 10 years ago, you talked about that accident, is that the person I saw in the mirror, there were so many even lies in my life that I had accepted as a truth about who I am that were false. But there were blind spots. I didn't realize it. And then I started asking myself a question, Kris, is what does Christ see when he looks at me? Right? He says that I'm his perfect workmanship. He's prepared good works for me to do in advance. What if I just accepted that I actually am perfect for what's on my heart, what God's putting on my heart right now, and there are no dependent events, as in I don't have to have more experience. I don't need to get ready. Right? He is right there with me. And so what I realized was there was this huge gap between almost this created identity and a true identity. And as I really started working to close that gap, not only for me, the distress and the anxiety and some of those sleepless nights and being a workaholic faded away, but I was able to be a lot more effective in that role because then I became very comfortable with the second thing that came to my mind, and that is radical vulnerability. Because you know what? It's not about my image, right? That is a place of pride. And if I can share something where I totally messed up or had a bad day or it was in a leadership situation and it did not go well, and I can share that with you and it helps you so you can learn from my mistakes, I think that has been really a big part of effectively leading people personally.
So, John, I loved what you said about conflict, where it can be productive. And I know that when we were chatting before the podcast started, that I was kind of differentiating servant leadership from leading like Jesus, as servant leadership being a little bit more softer than leading like Jesus. And I think one of the things that Jesus really did well when he was out and about doing ministry is being in a chaotic environment with people that didn't like him and were looking to set him up for failure or trouble along the way. So I think he was constantly in a potential conflict environment, and he always managed to do it well. And so, looking at your life and work, how did you get to a place as to where you understood that conflict could be productive?
Well, the first time I think I really understood the concept is actually when I read Pat Lencioni's book, The Five Dysfunctions of a Team, Kris. And it made so much sense to me that if you actually build so much trust on the team and you have such deep relationships with the people that you work with, it could even be your family, right? Your wife, your kids, that when you do have conflict, you actually, you're looking at the other person from this perspective. They don't have an agenda. They don't have something against me. They actually have an opinion that we need to consider, and it could be different than mine. So let's share this out. And we might have two totally different opinions. And I think as you get into that, like I'll tell you this, if you came and observed our team meetings and we're hashing stuff out, you'd be like, oh my goodness, this is crazy. And you know what? We get to the end of that, we make a decision. And then here's kind of a benchmark for me. let's just say that we could have maybe possibly made a better decision. We don't have the best outcome that we want, but nobody on the team afterwards goes, you know what? I told you so. Right? You know what? We should have done what I said. You know what they say? And this is the mindset I'm always trying to build is okay, in that conversation, in making that decision, what did we do well? And what did we learn, right? Or maybe there's multiple things that we learned so that next time we get a little bit, better at this. We make a little bit better decision. And then we're constantly getting better. And it's also a place where it's good to give some feedback, right? Our team is very comfortable with giving feedback to each other, and it's one of our core values, but from a place of helping somebody to encourage them to get better and to lift them up. Because think about this. Oftentimes we don't want to give feedback because we care about how somebody feels. Okay. That's not what Jesus did. Think about Peter. He denied Christ 3 times. And remember the question he asked him 3 times after he was resurrected. Now, was that nice? No, Peter felt horrible. But was it kind? Yes, because he cared more about Peter and where Peter was going and what Peter could do in the future than how Peter felt about him in that moment, if that makes sense. So that's always my perspective is if I'm tapping into Christ and really understanding what is in the best interest of somebody, I'm going to share the feedback from that perspective because I care more about them and their future and maybe even correcting some, habits or behaviors that they have because I know it's going to benefit them in the future. Because, man, there's been times I've gotten feedback and I'm like, I was ticked off. And I remember I came home once from work because my boss had given me some feedback, and man, I was bent. And I shared it with Donna, and you know what she said to me, Kris? I said, "What do
Right?
you think of that? This is what this guy John said." Da, 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 da. And she goes, "Oh, finally, somebody told you." Now, here's the thing. I had kind of this habit of how I show up in certain situations for a long time, and nobody gave me feedback, and it was affecting my ability to really influence and impact people. And finally, somebody did, and I had to process it and I had to make a choice. And I said, you know what? I'm going to make some changes. And I was very grateful that somebody gave me feedback because you know what? I knew he was coming from the right place. And that's what's really allowed me to process it.
Well, looking at your family, because I assume that you just don't teach this stuff at work. How does it work in your family? And how long have you been kind of hosting that environment?
Oh, I think ever since, over the last decade, I've been really intentional of saying, you know what, my family, especially my kids, they were, a decade ago, they were teenagers and then a 9-year-old. I said, this is my leadership lab. If I can develop amazing relationships with teenagers, if I can influence their behavior in a positive way, if I can create this a family kind of mission and esprit de corps, I can do that with any business team. Because trust me, leading teenagers influencing positively, teenage behavior, especially with everything they got going on in their world and their life, and they're starting to get independent and they're going through puberty and all these things. I'm like, you know what? I can lead anybody. And so that actually became my leadership lab, Kris. And today, I would say my 3 boys are some of my 3 closest friends. We talk, all 3 of us, almost daily. They'll reach out or I'll reach out to them. And my wife, we've been married 34 years and we couldn't, and we've had some rough spots. It has not all been sunshine and roses. And even this transition to being an empty nester in the last 2 years was actually really difficult because Donna's passion her whole life was to be a mom. And now that kind of season is over. It was much more difficult than I realized even going into it. And through that, though, we've emerged stronger because whenever you go through a time of adversity, doesn't matter whether it's a work at home, if you really lean into Christ and you abide in His Word and you're really developing that relationship, I think there's 2 outcomes. Either you're going to emerge stronger, physically, spiritually, emotionally, even financially in business, or you're going to emerge weaker. You do not maintain a status quo. And how we respond to adversity is the outcome. And so the outcome with my family has just been, and it's taken a lot of work and a lot of humility I've had to apologize at different times to every single one of my boys, and definitely more often to Donna. But doing that actually in a way that creates more trust, a deeper relationship, and accountability for the change in behavior that caused the reason to apologize in the first place.
We were talking earlier also about risk and how
Mm.
Jesus really exemplified the trust in his Father to be able to step out into the unknown, to be able to make decisions that didn't make sense to people around him. So I'm wondering if you have a story you can share of you leading like Jesus in that way.
Well, here's the one I'm thinking of. I was, I'd been in the hospital for 2 years, recovering from all those surgeries. I had a severe traumatic brain injury, and I could only work because of this TBI, maybe 8 or 9 hours a week. And Donna had to be my caregiver, Kris. And so we had lost everything. We'd had basically, actually, by the time I started my coaching business, I had had no income for 3 years. So our bank accounts had been drained. I was in chronic pain. And like I said, I only could work a few hours a week. And I'm laying there recovering from a shoulder surgery. And I think I was reading in the book of John, and I'm just crying out to the Lord, like, what do I do next? How do I provide for my family? Everything's been taken away. I have all these limitations, but I had this hope in Christ, right? I knew there was a plan. Um, and I remember God saying to me, and it wasn't an audible voice external, but I knew it was Holy Spirit. And here's what he said: John, I want you to use this life I've given you to equip and inspire leaders to work in my kingdom. Now, I did not know what that meant or what that looked like, but I just trusted that God would show me the next small step. I did not have to figure it out. It wasn't like, okay, I got the big idea, so now I'm going to go figure out how to implement it. No, God is going to give you all that. He's always showing us his will and what he's doing in the world and how you can join him. And 2 days later, Kris, I'm sitting there with a friend of mine, and he knew my whole situation. He'd been there through my recovery, but here's what he said to me. He goes, John, here's the things I have going on in my life, my business, my home, my faith. And he goes, and I feel like I'm just about to pull them all together and just really feel like I'm living life fully alive, but that's not where I'm at. But he goes, I've decided to hire a coach. And if you decide to become a coach, I'll be your first client. And I'm like, dude, that's awesome, Greg. What's a coach? I didn't even know, Kris, at the time. So I did all my research, but then and I went through some coach training, but I'm like, oh my goodness, how do I do this? I literally can only work a few hours a week. And that was a place of taking a huge risk. Instead of maybe getting a part-time job, something with a salary, which I could have done, maybe some remote work. Basically, God was telling me, go be an entrepreneur. Now, I probably would not have been voted most likely to succeed with all these limitations. My left eye is blind. I was very uncomfortable even driving a car at this point. They had to teach me how to walk and speak and drive again through this hospital visit. But I just trusted the Lord and took that step. Now, 6 months into the journey of trying to, build a coaching business, Kris, I had one client who was paying me $500 a month, and we were going backwards quickly. And at that point, I'm like, what? I didn't hear the Lord right. I was doubting, right? I had a serious like crisis of belief. Like, this is not it. This was not the path. And I just kept leaning into prayer, and God said, no, I want you to keep moving forward. Because I tell you what, in the past, when I would meet that resistance, I would see that as I'm on the wrong path, and I would pivot or turn or change jobs or change fields. Like, I went from technology to finance. But this time God said, no, keep moving forward. And it was very uncomfortable. I'm just being honest. But in that, I was responding to the Lord's leading. And 6 months later, so a year into starting this, I had 14 clients, and I was making as much as we needed every month. So we were no longer going backwards. And then what's happened now over the last decade has exceeded any expectations that I ever had in the beginning. And so that was a place of just, the way you define risk, it's almost like, are you willing to choose to trust the Lord? Are you willing to develop a relationship so you can really hear God's voice. And I think that was really the key that I've learned, and then keep applying. I try every day. Every day it's something I have to work on, Kris.
Yeah, I think all entrepreneurs go through that, and they go through it at different degrees of well, depending on where they're sourced from. People that don't know Jesus, they're really depending on themselves, luck, and other things, and that's really hard.
Yep.
But when you follow Jesus, it's still hard. But there is always a thread of faith and hope that you cling to. And I know I've had certain times in my career where, I've had to ask for finances for people to cover some bills. I'll be out with my dad and he'll know I'll be having a hard time financially. He'll be like, hey, why don't you go get some groceries? Like all of that stuff. You just have to sit and not be prideful and trust Jesus along the way and let people help when they feel led to help. And that's hard, I think. Pride is an issue. And how much do you see pride interfering with God's plan? You mentioned it a little bit earlier, but I would love for you to expand on that.
Well, if we just examine our language, right? Here's maybe a good way to think about it. And this is actually something I've really focused on. Whenever I say the word I've moved into a place of self-dependency, trusting my own understanding. I think that's a place of pride. Like, I need to do it. I need to perform. What do I need to do today? How do I need to run this meeting? And I've had to switch that. Whenever I hear the word I this is what I do. It's become a daily habit. Pause, pray, and listen. So, example, this morning, looking at all the stuff I have to do this week. I have a very busy week, and I'm like, okay, what do I need to do to get ready? I'm like, no, Lord, you know all these meetings and why they're in my calendar, and I feel good about everything that's in my calendar right now. And can you show me what I need to focus on right now to get ready for today? Right? We're recording this. It's Monday morning. So I did this morning, and all of a sudden the perspective shifts. And I'm like, oh, no, here's what I want you to think about. You're going to be meeting with Kris, right? I was thinking about that this morning at 6 o'clock. I have a meeting later up, and God showed me something like a pattern that was underneath. This is a client that I'm working with, right? And so now I'm going to be bringing a question that I think could really open up the conversation and be valuable then. But that's because I took the time to stop and pray about that person and say, what's next? I'm not trying to show up and be like the best coach or have the most incredible question. Like, no, because see, that's back into I'm worried about what they think about me. And if I let all of that go and think about this, and this is kind of the culture on our team right now. What could we accomplish if nobody cared at all who got credit? Imagine that. Imagine what a team could accomplish if nobody cared about who got credit because you were so focused on the mission and the calling God has put in front of you as a team to accomplish.
And the other neat thing about what you're saying is that you're just kind of flowing in the spirit with God, and you're letting God do whatever he wants with it. And I know what's really neat is when I watch a podcast or recording from a week ago, a year ago, years ago, and there'll be a piece of that message that applies to what's going on in my life today. And that becomes a pathway for the Lord to speak with me. And so it sounds like your willingness to stop, pause, think, and respond to Jesus really positions you to help people in the moment as well in the future. Have you ever been told by someone or heard like years later from someone that you helped them and you didn't even know it?
Yeah, that happens often, Kris. And I did it was part of a mastermind group that I'm with, and he wanted you to basically kind of do like this personal 360. You had send a questionnaire out to people that really knew you well in kind of your circle. And man, it was incredibly affirming. But one of the questions is, basically, what's your superpower? And what the theme was across all these, I think it was 8 or 9 responses, is that I help people think about things totally differently, consider options they've never considered, that open up not only possibility but hope. And I saw that as evidence of me staying in the flow with the Lord in when I'm in relationship with other people. Because trust me, I'm not that's not I'm not that smart, right? But I think so I guess maybe that's an example of what you're talking about.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I know another thing in that same vein is I don't script any of my podcasts. I literally just kind of sit back and listen and ask questions. And the interviews vary from podcast to podcast, but there's always a really neat thread in there of wisdom and knowledge that when people watch them, they get something from it. And so I love that about the way my guests interact with me, the way I interact with my guests, is that we're really letting Jesus host the podcast and we're just the vessels that it's going through. And I
Yep,
know it's the
100%.
same way with your podcast too, right? With you and your guests.
Yeah, my prayer before every podcast is, Lord, there's people listening all over the world. It's a large audience, but I'm like, Lord, help us, me and the guest. Let's say when you and I talked, just speak to that one person, because that they're going to listen to this at some time in the future. It could be tomorrow, it could be in 2 years from now, but help us say that one thing that you've been working on in their life that's just transformational, or this aha moment. And I hear about that from our audience all the time. And so it's just because what we're doing is, I think over the last decade also, my prayer life has really transitioned also. You remember that original prayer, like, God, what do I need to do? And he did answer that, right? Like, equip and inspire leaders to work in my kingdom. But what is that? That is, so this has been the transition of my prayer. Instead of, God, what's your will for me? God, reveal your will on what you're doing in Kris's life or her audience or in this meeting that I have this afternoon, and show me what I need to do to respond to the work that you're already doing. This became actually, I had this huge aha moment when I was reading when God went to Moses, right? Burning bush. We all know the story. And I was praying for like an assignment and a calling like this, because I should have died at that accident, but I'm here and I'm alive. And I figured, okay, there's got to be a reason. But what God showed me as I was reading that was, you know what? That was not God's will for Moses. God's will in that moment was to free a nation from captivity. And he was inviting Moses to join him in the work that was going to be done. Let me just ask you a question. If Moses just refused, like he just bailed, right? Would God's will have been thwarted? Nope. Would he have freed Israel? Nope, because now was the time. And then I started realizing I just need to pray differently. God, show me the will and what you're doing in the world and what I need to do to develop a deeper relationship with you and respond to what you're showing me so that I can partner with you even more fully. And that has been incredibly enriching. And I think almost just God maturing my faith, Kris.
Yeah, and I've experienced that in my life as well. And when I'm even out walking, sometimes I feel prompted to pray for people or do things. And that's just life with Jesus as a whole.
Yep.
It really is. So, as we start to move into the wrap up, I'm wondering if you have another story of the biggest risk you've ever taken, other than the one that you just told. Because I know that when you walk with Jesus, life is not without risk. And as we mature in Him, we learn to take bigger and bigger risks with Him. So, share another story so that the audience can kind of benefit from that.
Well, here was one. This was 2 years ago, and I'm working with a client of mine, and he'd built a $40 million financial services firm and sold it. And he wanted to build another one. And I was coaching him as he was relaunching this. And he said, "Hey, I want you to join me. Come over. I want to give you equity. I want you to be president. Let's build this." It was going to be a kingdom focused company. And I'm telling you, Kris, letting go of what I'd built for like 9 years at this point to join this person. It was like 6 months of prayer and discernment. And I initially said no. And finally, it was just confirmed. It was a process, right? Some of this just doesn't happen overnight. We wish it would, but it's a process. But I knew that it was the right thing to do to join this company. And at the time. And so I did that, and I turned everything over to my team, and I was just more kind of, a few hours a month helping this team, and they did great. A year into it, though, Kris, I realized this is not the person that I should be partnered with. And I'm like, and talk about, man, this was when I came to this realization, and we had some very candid conversations about why I was feeling this way. And a lot of prayer went into this. And God gave me the confirmation, though, no, it's time to leave. And I'm like, Lord, why did you have me turn over my company and go take over 14 months off and go basically put in all this time? I was working 50, 60 hours a week in the office at this company. And I just knew that it was not the right fit. Probably should have called it earlier, but now looking back on it, though, and these were both very difficult transitions. But in that, though, you know what I realized is God used that time to refresh my energy toward the work that I was doing at Beyond Influence, and the coaching and working with teams and helping them be profitable and building a kingdom culture and bringing a spirit of generosity. He totally gave me a whole new vision for where Beyond Influence fits into what he's doing in the world right now. And had I not taken that space, I would not be as energized and fired up. I couldn't wait to get up this morning. Monday morning, I could not wait to get up today. My alarm went off this morning at 6:00, and I was ready to hit it. And so sometimes in the moment, we don't understand why, because oftentimes we'll have a prayer, right? Do it. And here's what I've observed, right? God always has an answer. It's yes, no, not now, or you know what, John, I have a better idea. Okay. And so in that, though, that was a huge risk at the time, especially when I was in it and realized this is not working out. But the outcome, God knew what I needed. And that's because you know what? You can always trust God in his faithfulness. That's what I know.
Yep. And the other piece that I think happened that you didn't mention is God used you to bless this man, this company, and the people as well. It wasn't that they asked for it. That's how much our God loves everybody on the earth. He wants to bless them, regardless of whether or not they ask for it. So I
Correct.
think that was great that you were just an agent of blessing as well while you were there.
Yep.
So as we wrap up, I would love for you to give any final parting words, any advice, anything that the Lord puts on your heart for the listeners that would help them take a step towards the next season of life with Jesus. What would you like to share?
The first thing that just popped into my mind, so I'm just going to trust Holy Spirit on this. You know what it is? It's you have to surround yourself with people that are going where you want to go. People that can challenge you, give you the feedback, celebrate your wins. I'll never forget some of the first advice I ever got when I got out of the military back in 1995. My first mentor, this incredible guy, but he said, John, the person you're going to be in 5 years, a big part of it is going to depend on who you surround yourself with. And what I found, especially with men, Donna has a lot more close friends, but we don't have a lot of close friends. Those people that we could actually call and say, man, I really screwed up today. Hey, I did this and I'm ashamed of it, but I need to talk to you about it. Or, man, I'm doubting my competence and God's doing a work in my life and I can't understand it. Because God works, I mean, just look at Jesus and the disciples. God works in our lives through other people. And I think intentionally, like one of the exercises I did at the beginning of this year is I kind of audited who I'm spending time with. And are the people I'm spending time with helping me be closer to the Lord and have a better marriage and build a company that honors the Lord? And then I also ask myself, who are 2 or 3 people that are in my world that I don't know really well, that I need to intentionally put some time into, because I'd love to be closer with them, because they have wisdom, they have experience, they're ahead of me on this spiritual journey, and they can even help me kind of, sharpen the sword, so to speak. And I think intentionally cultivating that is powerful. And I've even created what I call a personal board of directors, people that are all in on what I'm doing. And I do that for a few other people too. But I think things like that are incredibly important, especially people that are walking the path with Christ.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much again for being part of the podcast. Everything that you've shared has been just spot on in terms of leading like Jesus. And for those of you that are listening, again, if John spoke to you in some particular way or resonated and you want to reach out to him for coaching or for whatever it is that you want, his information will be in the show notes. He would be happy to chat with you. And as always, I'm here too. If you want to reach out to me, feel free. You can just schedule a coffee and conversation. You can just put your phone up next to the QR code and it'll take you right there to do that. So have a great day, everybody. And thanks again. And don't ever forget to lead upside down. Thanks so much for hanging out and enjoying the Lead Upside Down podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. And remember, wherever you are, you can lead upside down too, just like Jesus did. Feel free to reach out to me if you want more information or if you think I can serve you in some way. Just go to my website, begin2shift.com, and click on the coffee and conversation icon and set that meeting up. Have a fantastic rest of your day.